Blessed Sabbath, everybody. Gary's just looked at me laughing. Oh, that's funny. So the flyer, our flyer, actually our program is fitting. It has a picture of an apple on it. Because that's what we're going to be talking about, guys. We're going to be talking about apples. And this, oh, let's show it on screen. Here we go. Can everybody see that? The beautiful apple. So thank you, Sister Hyacinth, for wherever she is now. There you are, for doing that. So this is a continuation. This is part 2. Last week we talked about part 1, and we looked at just the almost infinite variety of apples that our Father has given us, and the vast majority of which we've never ever seen before or tasted. We only have a select few in the stores. In fact, in 1910 there were 15,000 varieties in America, and apples aren't even, the apples that we eat, the original apples, they're from Kazakhstan, the wild apple forest of Kazakhstan. They're the big ones. They're not even native to this country, but yet America and apples are iconic. And so when the Pilgrims came, the Puritans, they brought all the trees with them, and they spread them like crazy. To where in 1910 there were 15,000 varieties, and today 9 out of every 10 apples we eat are 10 varieties across the world. So how did we go from 15,000 to only 10 varieties? And then let's ask another question: are the 10 varieties, are they healthy? Are they not healthy? Does an apple a day keep the doctor away? We looked at that a little bit, and we're going to look at it again, but with some different studies and some different information. So this picture here, maybe some of those look beautiful, maybe some of those look downright ugly. And some of them look lumpy, I would say that. Apples like this, of these shapes and sizes and colors, and some have imperfections. And then what you don't know, of course, by looking at it, the flavors. Every single one of those is from a different tree, a different variety. When you plant an apple from seed, you get a whole new apple. And so that right there, guys, those are heirloom apples. That's actually from an orchard in Iowa. And these apples here, these are a handful of over 1,000 varieties that they have. Can you imagine that? And here's what's cool too, and I would encourage us to go and do this, even though it's a little ways away. You can go to that orchard and you can taste all of the apples for free. They just let you come in and taste it for free. That's what Seed Savers Exchange. They're a big heirloom organic seed company, and they're based out of the Midwest. So if you have friends and family in the Midwest, like myself and Shane and Amanda do, and Amy's from the Midwest as well, it's a great place, one, to get seeds from, but two, to take a visit. See something that most people will never ever see or taste. Okay, we're going to talk about, and before we actually get to this apple, we're going to talk about what the problem is. There is a problem out there, and this is a study that was done in 1994 from some Japanese researchers. And we're looking at the apples right now that I'm talking about, the ones in the store. They compared Fuji apples, which is one of our most popular, with 2 other species of apples. We're going to get into that. I said species, not varieties. There are other species of apples out there, but all the ones that we eat, by and large, come from that original wild apple that you can find in Kazakhstan. And that's carryover from the flood, in my opinion. And so they compared Fuji apples with 2 other species, and they found that the apples from the other species on average had 5 times more antioxidant activity, including 4 times more vitamin E, and were much more effective at fighting leukemia cells. Pretty interesting. Check this out. One species had 80 times more cancer-fighting compounds than the Fuji apples. 80 times. Our food is not the same. The food we eat today, the food that's in the stores, it has the form, again, as I said last time, but not the power thereof. Yeah, it's empty, it's lacking. They concluded that Fuji apples, this is a sad story, guys, if we like Fujis, take it to your father. They concluded Fuji apples had almost no cancer-fighting activity. Almost none. But we think if we eat fruit and vegetables, we're good. Well, there's more to the story. Why? We need to know why, and then we're going to look at solutions. So we don't want to just leave people in a state of, fear and, oh, what do I do now? I can't eat anything. I'll just go on a water fast like Goshka, but, according to a scientific paper in 1996, and I'm gonna try to break this down because they use different, scientific names. They're looking at clones. A clone of an apple is like, if you find a variety that you like, Red Delicious, all of the Red Delicious apples that you get out there, they're clones of what would have been the original seedling tree that would have grown out from seed, and you can take a cutting or a scion wood. Everybody's heard of the term grafting. So anytime you graft, that's identical to that original tree. So there are trees today that are well over 800 years old. Not because the original tree is still alive, but because it has been propagated and continued on through a clone. That sign would have the exact same genetics as the original. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, great. So they're looking at these clones or these cultivars, and this is astounding. This is again why we have a problem. 64%, and this is only 439 varieties that they looked at, but these are all the ones that we've pretty much had since the 1900s. 64% of them, these studies found that they descended from only 5 different varieties. So of all these thousands and thousands of apples, 15,000, 64% of the most popular varieties of apples today only come from 5 varieties. Do we think that there might be some problems there? What happens when we take from a very small subset, if a very small group of organisms or people, do you have certain traits, certain qualities that aren't existing there? Maybe nutrition, maybe disease, maybe size, color, shape, flavor. Absolutely. So the modern apple as we know it that we get in the store, it's genetically inbred. It doesn't have the qualities that as these apples that these researchers have looked at have, or the heirloom apples, the ones that we don't see in the stores. And so that's an important part to understand. That's why we have the problem that we do today. We have taken an infinite pool of genes to have all these diversity and all these flavors. We just focus on a handful of them, and that's what our modern apple is today. So on to Monty's surprise. This is the hope. Now we get into solutions, guys. And actually, let me back up a second to look at a little bit more of why we have this problem. So because we only have a small amount of genetic material that all of our apples have come from in the stores, we're not talking about the heirloom ones and the wild ones, the problem is also disease tends to come up, doesn't it? If we're not eating a diversity of good, live, and healthy foods, there's probably a good chance our bodies may be susceptible to disease. Well, it's the same thing. If you have all these genetics of all these awesome wild apples from Kazakhstan, the original big guys, they're going to have so much genetic diversity that they're going to have resistance to disease. And so here's one of our problems. In addition, report of a new race of apple scab. That's one of many types of disease for apples. We're just talking about one. We're just honing in on one right now. It said a report of a new race of apple scab, which is virulent or resistant to all the varieties that have this specific VF gene. So in man's infinite wisdom, we've been able to take microscopes and we've been able to do DNA analysis and look at the DNA. We've been able to isolate, ooh, these apples have a gene that seems to make them resistant to this one disease. Well, let's just use these apples and just breed that with like another common apple, and we'll be good, we'll be protected. But it's saying what's happening because of our sin, there's mutations going on, and so now you have the diseases mutating and it's resisting these. So just because you have a scab resistant apple, not for long. And that's just because we don't have the diversity anymore. And so here's some hope. Monty's surprise. In April of 2000, Mark Christensen, a longtime advocate of heirloom fruits and vegetables, discovered one of the most nutritious apple varieties in the world on the North Island of New Zealand. He spotted an old apple tree growing along the side of the road, and it had apples unlike any that he had seen before. This man, in addition to being well-versed in apple varieties, had a keen interest in nutrition. He sent some of the apples to the New Zealand Institute for Plant and Food Research, and they were tested and compared to 250 other varieties. That's pretty cool. That's a good test. That's a good experiment. And these were varieties that hadn't been previously tested. These are the heirloom varieties, the open pollinated varieties, not the ones that man has selected, just a handful, that's 64% of the... No, we're not talking about that. We're talking about the ones nobody's even heard of anymore. And the skin of these apples had the highest level of flavonoids of all the other apples tested, and the second highest amount of proanthocyanins of all the apples, all 250 of those. In 2006, he sent the apples to the French National Institute for Health and Medical Research, and they found that this was more effective at destroying colon cancer cells than any other variety tested. Pretty cool. He named this variety Monty's Surprise, and instead, I love this, guys, I love this. Instead of patenting his find, as most plant breeders do today, then I ask the question, how can you patent biological life? Do we own that? Did we create that? How can man say this is mine, and you can't study it, you can't grow it, you can't use it, or you will be fined in the court of law? It doesn't make any sense. That's right. He and a handful of others formed the Heritage Food Crops Research Trust to spread the news about this variety and to give away young trees for free. That's amazing. Praise Father. Until now, these trees weren't available in the United States, but there's one nursery that has them, and I'm on the list for 10 of these trees, and anybody can get on the list. So if anybody's interested in this, email us at Talking Rock, and we'll get you the info for the nursery. So yeah, we're going to be trialing these things out. So this is wonderful. Now we're going to talk a little bit about wild apples. We're going to look at another picture of Monty's surprise here. Let's see. It's on. There we go. There's another picture of that pretty apple. Now we're talking about wild apples, and specifically in this country, we're going to look at one in particular. There are 35 different species of apples, with the only native apples to the United States being the crabapple. Why are they called crabapples? They tend to be sour, right? They also tend to be smaller. So the definition of a crabapple is basically any apple that is 2 inches or less in diameter. So you can have some good tasting ones, but by and large they are a little bit sour. But in juicing, oh man, eat your heart out. Those would be amazing. Good flavor. So the ancestor of all the apples we grow today in the stores, that's the one I was telling you guys about from eastern Kazakhstan. Those are the big, nice, sweet apples, and they also do have a lot of phytonutrients as well. So let's check this out. In the 2003 survey, the USDA fruit researchers measured the phytonutrient content of 321 wild and domesticated apple trees. The test showed that the wild apples were vastly more nutritious than our cultivated varieties. Vastly more. One species had 15 times more phytonutrients than Golden Delicious. Another had 65 more times. And the greatest was the Sikkim apple native to Nepal, with 100 times more phytonutrients. 100 times! Why is it? So what's going on here, guys? What's the moral of the story? I mean, what does it say in Genesis? Is Genesis 1:29? All plants bearing seed? We don't grow things out from seed anymore. We've lost it all. So why do the ones in the wild have all these nutrients? It's because they're still being grown from seed. Open pollination. God's ways are not man's ways. It's remarkable. And then this is even crazier yet. And compared to the ginger gold variety, which is a common one in the stores, it is 470 times more phytonutrients. 475 more times. One day's apple harvest gives them as much apple nutrition as most of us get in a lifetime. Here's the kicker with those little apples, though. They're little. We're talking like half a gram little. But the natives, they harvest them. They use them. Oh, absolutely. So it's a nutrient-dense, just extraordinary creation, but it's very tiny. And so let's talk about solutions. What do we do? What do we do with store apples? Are there any good ones? Are they all bad? Do we just chuck them out? So here's pictures of crab apples, and these are the ones we have in this country. And you can get all different colors, shapes, and sizes and flavors. If you find them, eat them, please. Your body will thank you. And here's a cool heirloom apple. Look at this. This is an 800-year-old apple out of the UK. This is highest of all the apples that they had tested in the UK up to this point. I don't know how many they tested. Called the Pendragon. So this thing is being continued to be propagated through cuttings. You have the exact same tree, even though the original tree was dead long ago. It's a beautiful apple, isn't it? There's another picture of the Pendragon. So store-bought apples, guys. Here's what one book called Eating on the Wild Side, which she looked at in 10 years. She looked at 6,000 peer-reviewed scientific articles. And here's some of the information she found. Specifically, we're talking about apples now. Here's the ones we want to stick to in the store. Braeburn, Cortland, Discovery, Granny Smith, Gala, Honeycrisp, Ida Red, McIntosh, Melrose, Ozark Gold, and Red Delicious. Here's the least nutritious ones, and if you guys need this stuff, just email us. We'll get it to you. Those are the most nutritious of the ones in the store, so those are the ones you want to focus on. Here's the least nutritious. L-Star, Empire, Pink Lady, Golden Delicious, and Ginger Gold. I know, Pink Lady's a delicious apple, I'm not going to lie, but it's got very little in it. That's the reality. They do taste very good. But that's how we focus on it, and they're not shy to admit that fruit breeding programs, all they've focused on is just flavor. And in fact, in doing this study on apples, I found that there are problems across all the board with all the fruit being inbred, especially raspberries and peaches. I've seen that in the studies. It creates all kinds of problems. And so here's let's talk about heirloom apples. So that's that would be your second best option, is to stick with those in the stores. But your best is to find farmers who are growing heirloom apples and grow them yourselves, guys. And the Plant and Food Research Institute in 2015 found superior levels of beneficial polyphenolic compounds existing in the old heritage cultivars, of which, again, in America alone, there were 15,000 plus. European cider apples, the old ones, for instance, they've been identified as having high levels of cancer-inhibiting compounds. Seedling varieties, so those were all the heirloom apples, were all from seed. You know, those are all the ones that man did not do anything with. And so those are the things that we want to stick to, guys. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to our lovely sisters here. We're going to be blessing us with some special music. Thanks.